Hi everyone, my name is Yaakov Horowitz, and thank you very much for joining our live. The title of the live is Context and Nuance regarding the recent developments in Israel. And the big idea was that I wanted to share my reflections and my thought about the entire episode that's been evolving in Israel, and particularly on how it impacts survivors. You know, there are many wonderful people who are in the world of chinuch and education and the establishment, whatever you want to call it, the beards and the suits. The folks in chinuch and leadership positions. And there are lots of wonderful, wonderful people who, through no fault of their own, are abuse survivors. But usually people, stay in their silos. Over the past 25 years, I've been running back and forth between the two. I often, the metaphor that comes to mind when I find myself going back and forth between the groups, they have, in larger Jewish communities, some of them have like multiple simcha halls, like they have a building with 5-6 different rooms, and different parties go on, and you can have simultaneously different events, life cycle events. So like I always have this, may Hashem forgive me, my mind wanders and I have this visual image of going to one of those multiple simcha places, and one of those buildings, and you see like there's a yahrzeit suda in one of them, an event marking the anniversary of somebody's death, and a party going on next door, and both folks are in their own rooms, and you have this one guy who's Ritalin wore off, that would be me, bouncing back and forth between the two rooms. The old joke about an accountant, he has his feet in an ice bucket and his head near an oven. He says on the average he's doing okay. So, I find myself in both worlds. I thankfully I wasn't abused as a child. But I do find kinship and friendship. I have some very close friends who are abuse survivors, and I've always done my best throughout my adult life to be a voice for the voiceless. One of the most profound quotes that had such a deep impact on my life was from Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik of blessed memory, who said that the function of a rabbi is to be a voice for the people in his community who don't have one. And the backstory to that line is that wealthy people and people who know people don't need rabbis to get what they want. Sometimes they want the rabbis out of the way. But the people who are voiceless need someone to advocate for them. That was his thought, and I've always felt that to the extent that I could provide that, I've always tried to do my very best. So I was a 8th grade Rebbe for 15 years. I was a school principal for 22, a yeshiva that I founded until I stepped down a few years ago to work actually on child safety. I was appointed with great humility. I was appointed while in my 30s by Rabbi Moshe Zatzal and by the Miatzis Gedali Torah of the Aguda. On my very frail shoulders, they placed an extraordinary responsibility to run a program called Project Yes for teens at risk. And I've done my very best to fulfill that sacred mission over the years. The direction that I got from Rabbi Zatzal and the leadership of the Aguda to do that, and at the same time, I find myself hanging out with abuse survivors, trying to understand their world and trying to support them in any way possible, doing what I can to prevent today's children from being abused. So here too, with this entire episode, with what happened with Chaim Walter, there is this almost a disconnect. In fact, it's interesting because most of the people at large, and especially survivors, were very pleased to see the immediate reaction. And I kept telling people, I said it publicly and privately, excuse me, I said publicly and privately that I thought it was a tremendous step forward in the way we approach serious allegations of child abuse. Walter was removed from his books. Even my dear friend Modi Getz pulled books from Eichler, and then Feldheim pulled their books after consulting with their gadol, with a Torah scholar, that a sage who leads them, and he was taken off the Ated and Ated Naman. All the positions that he had of authority were removed from him temporarily for some of them, and I felt that it was a great step forward, and a lot of survivors did. And then after he killed himself, like, everything seemed to flip, and a lot of things happened that survivors were very pained about. Especially all the more so after the terrible suicide of one of his victims, one of Walter's victims. I was trying to think, I don't have many people who follow me around between the two worlds. So I wanted to convey, my objective here is not to convey what the establishment feels to the survivors, although I've had many discussions with them about this, but I really would like to convey how some of them feel and some of what experiences that they have, and why is it that they responded so negatively, and why it caused such devastation. And I think I wrote it on the post here, on the invitation. I wrote that thoughtful people, for thoughtful people who want to understand nuance, that's what this is for. So, I don't do well with radicals. If you're radical one way or the other, you don't need me here. But I think that the vast, overwhelming majority of people do want to know. At least 100 people contacted me over the last, since this started, since it kicked into gear last week, asking me to just please understand it all. And I've done my best, and then I just decided to do it publicly. And the closest thing that I have to this, to explain this, to put it in context, I had a little bit of a flashback to something that happened almost exactly 10 years ago. In May of 2012, there was a large protest at the Asifa. Asifa means a gathering. The Asifa, to folks in the yeshiva world, most of them would know what that means. It was a gathering that took place in formerly Shea Stadium, now known as Citi Field. And it was a very understandable anxiety among community leaders, among rabbis, among educators, our gedolim, our leading sages, about the influence of technology. Now, people have different approaches. Some people say that, have some sort of technology and manage it. And there were discussions about, whether it should be completely removed from Orthodox Jewish homes or not. There was a lot of discussion about it, and there was an asifa. There was a gathering, a very big gathering. Basically, Shea Stadium was filled, and there were lots of people, Torah sages, gedolim, and rabbis who delivered lectures about the dangers of technology, which we all agree upon, but their position was more to do our best, either to ban it or to supervise it, to do that. And there was a very large protest across the street. There were about 100, 200 people. And I kept on getting messages from people. There are such parallels between these two that I found it so striking. Sometimes when you're in something, when you're in a situation, it's harder to step back and look at it. So maybe with 10 years of distance, I'm offering this as a window into the world of how abuse survivors feel. And I'm not sure if I said I haven't gone. If I have this haunted look in my eyes, it's because I am. I really, Hashem gave me a gift for which I thank Him for all the time, that I'm usually, against my wife Odi, we're married, Baruch Hashem, 41 years, I'm able to park stuff, our children, I'm usually able to park things and just come home and turn it off, at least for the meantime. I wasn't able to here. I was shaken to my core last week by the reaction of some of the survivors. And I have not been able to park it. And that's why I said I have to do something about it. So I want to make it clear, this is in no way representative of what abuse survivors feel. Every survivor feels, he or she feels the way they feel. I am not a spokesperson for them. I want to make it perfectly clear. I am not a spokesperson for any survivors. God forbid, I don't pretend to represent how my dear brothers and sisters who are abuse survivors are feeling. This is Yankee Horowitz, my perspective of how things look, like I mentioned at the beginning, bouncing back and forth between these two worlds. So please, I beg all abuse survivors, if you feel that I'm not representing properly how you feel, or you completely opposed to how I feel, any shortcoming in this is mine and mine alone. So forgive me, I have the best of intentions. Forgive me if I fall short. So I wrote an article on my website, and it's called, What's the Deal with These Protesters? What's the deal with these protesters? And I mentioned that people were asking me exactly that question. And I'm going to read, not all of this, but much of it. And I'm going to post all of it on my Instagram page and my other social media pages. I'll send it to I have a larger email list. I'll send it all around. The text of this article, it was written 5/25/12, almost 10 years ago. And again, I'm going to read segments, but some of them are just so striking in the parallels. Tuesday evening, a charming and sincere young man who is a survivor of childhood abuse shared with me that he had driven 7 hours each way in order to attend the protest at the Internet Asifa, in quotes, again, as a gathering in City Field, He mentioned how gratifying it was and how pleased he was to have made the trip. It was the second rally recently organized by abuse victims. I used the word survivors. I did use the word victims then, and I apologize to all survivors. The first held at a Williamsburg fundraiser for an individual who was under indictment for allegedly molesting a child over a period of 4 years. That was Nehemiah Weberman. There was a big fundraiser there, and that was the first protest. It was the first time that survivors actually got together and started to advocate for what they felt was right. These protests have elicited a wide range of emotions among members of our community, along a continuum ranging from sorrow and sympathy to bewilderment and bemusement, even hostility and anger. And one of the things people were saying to me, at least, as why do they have to protest here? If they want to protest child abuse, so go, make a protest. Of course they should, but why here? And what's in the Internet Asifa, a bunch of Orthodox Jews are getting together for a good cause to discuss the dangers of technology. Like, why? What are you making it? What's the connection? Which I explain in the piece. However, many of our community members have been asking those of us who are advocates for abuse survivors, what's the deal with these protests? What exactly do the survivors want? Others are asking more basic questions like, why can't they move on with their lives? Or someone messed around with a friend of mine and he got over it, why can't they? Well, my friends, it will serve us well. I'm reading from the piece. To better understand the survivors and what it is that they want. We ought to, because this conversation is very long overdue. So whatever overdue it was there, I still believe add 10 years to that. But in a practical sense, it's imperative that we do so, because in all likelihood these protests will grow and intensify in the years ahead. The survivors are finding their voices, and they will only gain traction now that national and international media is covering the abuse matters as it relates to our community. Now, I'm not going to go over all the details, but I said in order to begin to understand why abuse is so destructive, I go into the Abraham Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs. You can Google search it, Abraham Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs. And the basic idea of the Hierarchy of Needs was that Maslow divided human needs into 5 levels. And he said that they were sequential, meaning that you cannot get from if you're missing level 1, you can't get to 2. If you're missing 2, you can't get to 3. Okay, that was Maslow's big idea. So the lowest level is physiological needs: food, drink, water. This is a physiological need. I have dry mouth, by the way, and if I don't take a drink, I get unsettled. It's hard for me to concentrate on my speech. Maslow would say I can't concentrate on my talk, which is level 5, because my mouth is dry, right? But in the extreme sense, we'll get there. So physiological need is the lowest level. Then comes security, just feeling safe. Then comes family, love, relationships. 4th is self-esteem, and the 5th is self-actualization, which we call in Yiddish to steig, to grow, to be, as the Marines say, to be all you could be. Okay, so those are the 5 levels of Maslow, and it's extraordinarily powerful because think of how someone feels the day after a hurricane, or worse, even a week after a hurricane, right? They have no place to live, they haven't taken a shower, they don't have the basic needs. If somebody wants to engage them in a relationship, right, friendship or anything that's level 3, let's say, like, you kidding me? Like, let's say the cell phones are working, someone calls up and says, "Hey, how you doing, Yankee? Let's go. You want? I'm in town. Let's schmooze a little. Let's talk." Go away, Okay, and think about the safety thing. If your car breaks down on the wrong side of the tracks, you're in a bad neighborhood. You have 2% on your phone, and your life coach calls and says he does a 5 with you. He tries to talk 5 with you and says, how are we doing with those? Remember those 5-year goals we were talking about last week? Did you ever, to develop them further? Wow, I don't know if I'll be alive in 5 minutes. This is really powerful stuff, folks. And if you want to understand abuse, it's not just abuse survivors. Anytime, there's so many applications of it. I've been doing 1-minute parenting clips. I did 2 weeks on Maslow. If you're interested, it's over at the next Instagram site. It's at Bright Beginnings Forum. If you want to just learn about it more in detail, how it pertains to education and other things, I did discuss it in detail there. Maybe I'll post some of those clips here. But that's the big idea, that if you don't have your physical needs taken care of, if you don't have safety needs taken care of, it's really hard to move on to family. It can't, to the relationships and certainly self-esteem and certainly self-actualization, which means the steig, which is why people who are in the field will tell you that if someone is an abuse survivor, God forbid, or if someone has other trauma in their life, or if somebody loses a parent and their life is upended, don't press them for level 5s, which is davening and learning. In fact, it's fascinating. If you look at the halachas, the Jewish law, an onin, someone whose relative just died, they don't do any mitzvahs. I know it's not the only reason, but the concept, I guess you could also tie. So that's basically the big idea explaining Maslow. And then I wrote, child abuse destroys innocent children's lives in so many ways, but perhaps the most damaging component of all is the fact that it totally destroys their level 2 security, without which it's quite literally impossible for them to rebuild their lives. How can they ever feel safe again after they were violated? Just imagine what it would be like having a childhood where you were living 24/7 like that fellow in the dangerous neighborhood who had a broken down car. And all of this is more damaging when perpetrated by a family member, friend, or educator whom the children were depending on to keep them safe. And as the research shows, that when it's someone close to them who should be protecting them, it's that much worse. For if the adults in their life can't protect them, who can they fully trust again? It's important to note that just like people celebrate sports victories or losses in different ways, same thing, people grieve in different ways, and therefore some people are able to move on, some people aren't. All of this is exacerbated when children come. This is really important, folks. All of this is exacerbated when the children come forward and are not believed, or worse yet, punished. Here's where the parallels start. Punished or threatened for reporting their molester. It's quite literally a second round of abuse, and it just reinforces the feeling of being rootless and wind-driven. That means feeling alone and feeling betrayed, and feeling that people in their life who should be protecting them, who should recognize their pain and stand with them, have abandoned them. And that's what happens when they come forward and the people in their life who are supposed to protect them don't. Okay? Speaking of not believing the victim, research indicates that the overwhelming majority of children who come forward with allegations are telling the truth. Think about it. Why would anybody in their right mind come forward with a claim of being abused if it didn't happen? In parenthetic parentheses, open parentheses, exception to this rule is messy custody battles where one party clearly stands to gain if the other is maligned, which doesn't mean, God forbid, that all custody battle allegations are untrue, but we find that there's a higher propensity. But generally speaking, the research shows that a very large majority are true. All the more so in our community where there's a stigma attached to it, unfortunately, and going public gets the perpetrator apprehended. Okay? Now, about 5 years ago, this was written 10 years ago again, 5 years ago, as awareness in our community about the matter of child abuse began to rise, and here's also, it's so interesting, the parallel of what happened until Walter died and afterwards. It's that hope that things are finally getting better that crushed them. And in fact, many people told me, why, look, they should have realized that things are so much better, everything went so well, why did they, at the big funeral he had and people who stuck up for him, whatever. It's fascinating and heartbreaking. About 5 years ago, awareness in our community about the matter of child abuse began to rise. Many of the long-suffering victims began to hope against hope that things would finally change. People would finally get it, they believed, and they would once again feel welcome and nurtured instead of being treated as pariahs who ruined the sterling reputations of their abusers. Who knows? They might even get their level 2 security back again. And the survivors were dreaming then when people started talking about it. And finally, maybe people are going to take this seriously and maybe we'll once again be welcome. They don't understand, folks. The survivors, they don't understand why we're being shunned. They ruined our lives. Why aren't you comforting us? Why are there organizations that support all sorts of people who have tragedies, and it's all wonderful? Why aren't they doing anything why aren't they paying for our therapy? Why aren't people acknowledging our pain? Why don't people come over and say, look, I don't understand what you're going through, but I'm so sorry. Okay? Excuse me. Then they pick up a Haredi publication one weekend and see a picture of a group of distinguished rabbis visiting a monster in a Virginia jail cell who was serving a 31-year prison sentence for raping his daughters in 3 continents over a period of many years. That went on about the time of the internet asifa. More than 10 survivors contacted me as soon as that picture ran in the paper. How could they do that to us? They asked me. Don't they know by supporting a molester they're stabbing us in the heart? They cried. Well, this is back to me writing. Yes, they are. They really are. They are. I'm not saying those people meant to, but when they looked in the paper, and I'm just an advocate for kids. Baruch Hashem, thank God I was never molested. It was a dagger through my heart when I saw them. I called them up. And they're nice people, charitable people, kind people, learned people. What are you doing there? And if you're going to visit a molester, you have to take a picture of it and put it in the paper. I look how angry I'm getting. Imagine what they felt like. Could you imagine what a child feels like who's abused and sees rabbis who are not sticking up for him going and visiting an abuser? Or, in this case, praising someone who destroyed their lives. And if it's 62 years old, it's having this effect on me. What do you think it feels like to a 20-year-old kid who's trying to get their life back together and figure it all out? What do you think it feels like to them to see 1,000 people at Walter's funeral and just 20 or whatever it was people at the young lady, his victim who killed herself? And that imbalance is not just that situation. Again, I'm not speaking for them. I'm saying my perspective of how they feel, maybe viewed through my eyes. So they're saying to themselves, what a topsy-turvy world I live in. I went to school, I did what I was supposed to, and somebody from this community violated me. Why isn't anybody standing up for me? Why aren't they helping me out? Why aren't they coming over and asking me what I need? Why aren't... And then what happens, by the way, parenthetically, is usually the survivors, unfortunately, because they suffer trauma through no fault of their own, they wind up acting out. So many of them, God forbid, develop substance abuse habits, anything to dull the pain, which doesn't help. It's just temporary. You know, when somebody once complained to me, a well-known child molester got a very long sentence, and somebody told me afterwards that, Yankee, you say we should go to the police if the police are going to give these crazy sentences. This was only, so how could you tell us to go to the police if they're giving those types of sentences? So I couldn't resist. The first thing I said was, I said, well, okay, if you want to get them released earlier, will you take them to your house? Do me a favor, wherever your grandchildren are sleeping that night, can we put them up there, or are you just okay if they molest somebody else's kid? The first thing I said. But the second thing I said that's more relevant was, I said, the only one who has a life sentence are the abusers. The survivors. The only ones who truly have a life sentence, who never, some function, some not, some are able to pull their lives together, some never can't. But those abusers are in their lives forever, all of their life, till they take their last breath. So, I don't want to hear anybody telling me how long the prison sentences are, or how unfortunate it is. Their families are different. Their families are completely innocent, and unfortunately, they're probably going to victimize themselves. But when kids who've been abused and had their lives torn from them are watching abusers be praised and money raised for their legal defense, and all of those things, it's a dagger in their heart. I'm sorry. I told myself I try to keep it in control. I don't always succeed. And what in the world should survivors in our community think when they see a huge fundraiser of someone accused of molesting a child? Many of them view the very public nature of this effort as a clear warning of what's in store for the future for anyone who might dare report a predator to the authorities. Just so you know, this fundraiser case was the only abuse case that I've ever got involved in personally, and stood with the victim and said that I believe the victim, and I went to the trial. It was the only time I ever did it on that level, and I got involved the day after the fundraiser because I understood what that fundraiser was. Now, this is also important. To many of the survivors, though, the final straw was the internet asifa, the internet gathering I mentioned earlier, gathering in City Field to promote what we all are in favor of, which is, supervision of the internet, or for some, banning the internet from our homes completely, which not everybody supports, but be that as it may. For many of the survivors of the final straws, and this I heard from so many survivors, why are they so upset? Why are the survivors upset? Let me count the ways. To begin with, the kids in the street know the truth, that the internet is a firecracker compared to the atom bomb of abuse as far as abandoning religion is concerned. Let me read that again. I absolutely believe it. I've said it for 20 years consistently. I did a survey of 100 people who left religion, and I asked them to list the top reasons. Internet was not even on the top 10. The internet was not even on the top 10. You know what was on the top 10? In my opinion, 1, 2, 3, and 4 are abuse. So, to begin with, the kids in the street know the truth that the internet is a firecracker compared to the atom bomb of abuse as far as abandoning religion is concerned. Just ask any of them or any of the adults in our community who work with the at-risk teen population what the main reason is for kids leaving Yiddishkeit. Moreover, many of these kids credit the connectivity of the internet for finally raising awareness of abuse in our community. And as we all know, there's more than a kernel of truth there. Why are the people running the internet asifa blaming the internet for causing kids go off the derech and saying nothing about the matter of child safety, they wonder? Another thing that they said. Now, by the way, that doesn't mean that people aren't entitled, that rabbis aren't entitled to make gatherings, whatever they feel is important. And I'm not suggesting that it was wrong to do the asifa. Absolutely not. Of course not. But from their perspective, knowing what they know, what a large percentage of them were abused, and how it damaged their life more than any internet possible, that's what they were saying. That's what they were saying. Why are they doing this? Why don't they stop the kids from abusing? Why don't they stop abusers and get rid of them? Bottom line, there are hundreds and hundreds of abuse victims and survivors who were once part of our kehilos, our communities. Some left completely while others exist on the fringes, misunderstood, marginalized, and hurting. Trust me, and this is absolutely true, in my opinion. The vast, overwhelming majority of them are nice kids who want neither vengeance nor revenge. They do, however, want to see that today's children don't suffer the way they did, and they desperately want to see that things are changing as it relates to child safety. Now that the lid has blown off, this is the end of the article that I wrote 10 years ago. These young men and women who had their innocent childhood stolen from them by vicious predators masquerading as upstanding members of the community will have their voices heard and their stories told. We have two stark choices. This is how I ended the piece. We can reach out, engage with them, and really listen to what they have to say. Or we can continue to give them the back of our hands, and we will hear their tortured messages through the front pages of the newspapers and under the glaring lights of the television cameras. Like I said, I don't know exactly how the survivors are feeling. But I do know that this is my perception of how they're feeling. And I invite survivors to come, tell me what I missed. I'll be glad to fill it in, what I got wrong. Yesterday on social media, a survivor posted, I wrote a piece encouraging people to support survivors. So a fellow wrote, Rabbi, it's nice that you I don't remember the exact words, that it's nice that you feel, you expressing your love for for survivors. Just instead of talking, why don't you just listen to us? That's what he wrote. Okay? Instead of talking, why don't you just listen? Now, I could easily have been offended and said, you know what I did, something? I emailed him and I said I really would like to listen. We spoke for an hour yesterday, and he gave me some insights that I didn't have. And I think what he said was the truth. That's why I say you can't speak for anybody. So what should we do as a community? What should we do now that we're here? And there's been so much pain and so much confusion, not only among the abuse survivors, but among people of our community of all stripes. People are struggling to figure this out, to make sense of this all. How to speak to our children, how to protect them. And my humble suggestion is that we really do engage with the abuse survivors. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to be part of an organization, you just have to care. So if you see somebody that you know is a survivor, call him or her up and ask them how they're doing. Like that guy told me, and he was right, listen more than you talk. Ask them how they're doing, ask them what they would like to see from us, the beards and the suits. What would they like to see? What would give them comfort? I have some ideas, I have some real ideas, and I'm going to push with every ounce of power that I have, or little power that whatever influence or whatever juice I have, I'm going to push very hard for certain things that I think will be comforting to them. But we need to engage in this, folks. We need to listen. We need to hear. We need to better understand. None of us can I don't understand it. I don't profess to understand it. But we need to do a better job at making them feel welcome and ignoring sometimes the trappings and antisocial behavior that sometimes comes with abuse, that comes with frustration, and things that they try to do to dull this pain that never goes away. So I think we can do a lot. I think we can do a lot. And my purpose here was, God forbid, not to discredit the folks who did the internet asifa or say anything negative against the community. I'm a very proud member of this community. This is where I live. This is where I raise our children and grandchildren. We just want to make things better, and we need to, like I said there, it's been 10 years. By the way, just parenthetically, I did bring some abuse survivors. I asked them I met with them after this internet asifa. I met with a few and I asked them, what would you like to do? And they said, we would like to go tell some Rabbanim how we feel. And I set up 3-4 meetings with some very, very distinguished rabbis who really thanked me afterwards. And they were extremely respectful, the survivors. So they want us, what do they want from us? They want, probably above all, they want that today's kids shouldn't suffer. And I think any steps that we take to get abusers off the streets, to increase child safety education, to see to it that we stop trying to manage people who are abusers and keep an eye on them and all of that stuff that never worked, and get them to the authorities where they belong. That would be a huge, huge, huge step. And any progress in that direction would be so meaningful. We have to understand each other. We have to understand our abuse survivors to the extent that we can. We can't understand them completely. It's not possible. But for just a moment, try to think of what it's like to have it grown up with a family, in a family, part of the community. Now, really, try to process this. A kid's minding his or her own business. They're in school, part of a community. Something horrible happens to them, perhaps even by someone who's supposed to be protecting them, perhaps even by an upstanding member of the community, perhaps by a child author who's praised everywhere and defended afterwards. And what do they do then? They were excluded from not only are they suffering their pain, but people don't want to see them and they start acting out. Of course they're going to act out. How could anybody expect them to just go on with their lives? You saw we did Maslow at the beginning. They can't. So, what can we do? The first thing I would love for you to walk away from is know that we need to learn more. We need to learn more. We need to understand this better. We need to reach out to the kids. We need to listen to them. I got tochacha yesterday. I got a little musser. I got a little shot in the ribs. The guy, who told me, I said, I wrote with all good intention. And one of my family members saw that and said, "Ta, isn't that disgusting?" Because, I wrote with emotion. I did a hashtag to say, "I stand with abuse survivors, we love you." And, the guy said, "Hey, stop telling me you love me. Why don't you listen to me?" And I said, he's right. He's right. And I told the guy that he was right. He was right. I talked. I should be listening more. I would still talk. But that's what we have to do. We have to just try to know that we don't understand. We have to see what type of public moves we could do that would convey to the children that we mean business now. I said everything I have to say. I'm a big believer. I'm an optimist by nature. I've been very rattled by the suicide of the young lady. I was rattled by this story. I was rattled by, the story of the young lady taking her life, and then by the whole story. And I've heard things from survivors in terms of their own emotional wellness that that shook me to my core in terms of how the wellness was affected by this. And I'm really, that's the look in my eyes, that's what you're seeing, that's the haunted look. Worried. I went to sleep almost 2 o'clock last night. I got up at 5:30 and I was afraid to turn on my phone. I was afraid to turn on my phone. Thankfully, it was quiet. Let's do what we can. I don't have any ideas at the moment. I do want to create venues, safe spaces, where survivors can come and speak to community leaders, and I am going to do that. I'm not sure where and how, but I was talking to a few people yesterday, and I gave them my word that I would like to. I will do my very best to get them some FaceTime with community leaders so that they can hear from them. I believe I mentioned that. I believe I mentioned at the beginning of the talk that I did it 10 years ago, and I think it was good for both sides. The rabbis thanked me for doing it, and the abuse survivors did. So, hope springs eternal. We have to believe that we have the capacity to make things better. We have to believe that we have the capacity to make the world a safer place. We have to. We have to. And we have to re-engage with our kids and adults and let them know that we care, and let them know that we want to listen, and that we're determined to do what we can. I'm sorry I got so emotional, forgive me. It is what it is. So please, join, do what you can, be on the right side of this. Do it as an individual by reaching out to survivors. You see people on social media talking about the fact that they were abused. Drop them a note. Ask them if you can call them. Don't try to say anything smart. All you need to do is listen. Listen to my buddy who told it to me, my new buddy who told it to me yesterday. Thank you very much for listening, everyone. And I really hope that this talk overall provided some level of nuance and a level of understanding that I don't expect anyone to have who's not in the space. Okay, thank you very well. Thank you very much. Hashem should grant to all my brothers and sisters who are survivors, Hashem should grant you healing and serenity and a better tomorrow, a healthier tomorrow, and a tomorrow where you will feel, hopefully, that people around you are listening and trying to make things better in the future. Thank you very much, everyone. Be well.